something that says PAR-Q plus. So what is a PAR-Q?
Physical activity readiness questionnaire.
Okay, so it's a physical activity readiness questionnaire. So what is that used for?
For screening somebody before starting a training program.
Okay, and so it says 17 plus, Q plus. What does that mean? In the olden days, it wasn't that long ago, but before 2017, we used a PAR-Q. It was a one-page screening form. And so before we started an exercise program or whatever, we would screen people. And it would be like a one little page thing, check off, depending upon what boxes you checked, you were good to go, or you need to go see a physician or somebody before you started an exercise program. And so now they've got a newer form that's called the PAR-Q plus. It's a lot more detailed than the older form was. Now there's liability issues with exercise, right? Can you get sued as an exercise instructor? Yeah. You know, anybody gets sued for anything. Okay? And so if you got money, they'll sue you. If you're poor like me, they don't want to sue you that much. But if you've got money, people go after it. And so your standard of practice is different based upon your education and level. And so if you're a physician, your standard of practice is up there, right? If you're a physician, you have certain standards and you've got to follow those standards. If you vary from those standards or whatever, and somebody sues you, you're in trouble, right? Nurses are not as high as physicians, and so because their training is not as high and the level of their expertise is not as high as a doctor is, a medical doctor. So their standards what? Lower. A little lower, right? Exercise scientists, exercise professionals, we have a standard of practice. And if somebody wanted to sue you, they would use the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines as the standard. So if you come up with your own standards or make up your own little deal or whatever, they're going to say, okay, did you follow these guidelines? Did you do the PAR-Q? Did you screen the person? So forth. And so probably there's little chance of them going after you, but if they did, if somebody dies and you're in charge, there's going to be an investigation and there's going to be some people checking to see what you did. So if you kill somebody or if you do something that's not appropriate, you can get into big trouble. If you're a coach and you say, hey, I want all you kids to take this supplement, and one kid dies, you're done. Okay? Chief Jordan, the fire chief, he had in training, they have training officers, and the training officers aren't trained in exercise. They're just firemen, and they've been through firefighter school or whatever, and say, hey, we got these firemen, and it's sort of like, in the old days, it was sort of like, okay, how bad can I torture these guys to see if they're going to quit or not? Okay, and so they worked them really, really hard, and they ran them till they fell out and all that kind of stuff. Well, last year, they put 3 in the hospital with a rhabdo. And I talked to Chief Jordan. I said, Chief Jordan, if one of these guys dies out here, you're going to lose your job. And all these guys are going to lose their jobs. The city's going to be sued for millions of dollars. And he says, I know, we've got to change. We've got to change the way we train these people, because I can't go to jail for my training officers not doing what they're supposed to do. And so I said, yeah, okay, we've got these standards, we've got the PAR-Q, we've got certain things. We need to have some education for these training officers so they don't go in and run these people in the heat till they fall out and get rhabdo. Then rhabdo can shut your kidneys down, and then it can eventually kill a person. So then rhabdo was bad last year, hot summer. And so then the fire college calls me in Tuscaloosa. And the fire college trains people from all over the world, and thousands of firefighters every year. And they said, well, we've had a couple of firefighters die this year from rhabdo, and what can we do? And so I said, well, we need to start working on some training for the fire college in Tuscaloosa, and get these people trained to be aware of what the signs are, what the symptoms are, what to look for, because if not, some people are going to be in big trouble there. So, as an exercise professional, you have to follow certain what? Standards and criteria, right? And so the fire college says we've got to educate people, we've got to do something about this. If we let it go, it happens again, and we kill another firefighter in training, some people's heads are going to roll for that. So they set the standards, and we normally use the American College of Sports Medicine standards, or the fire people have the NFPA standards, National Firefighter Protection standards there. And so that's why they have certain fitness standards in terms of running and so forth. And so the good fire departments do all that. The little volunteer fire department that's out there, they often don't have any standards at all, or very weak standards. And so hopefully if you have an issue or problem and they come to get you, it's the Montgomery Fire Department, not the local boys that hang out at the volunteer station there. And so Montgomery, you're good. If you're having a problem right now, and I call the fire department from over here, they'll probably be here within 3 minutes. Okay, when my wife had her accident in Elmore County, it takes 20, 30 minutes to get there. And by that time, you're what? Too late, right? And so that's why it's good to have good facilities and so forth. So we all have to follow what? Guidelines, right? And there's coaches that have killed athletes, okay? And so, and anytime somebody exercises, they're at risk. I'm sort of curious in terms of how these gyms that are open 24 hours a day with no supervision make it without getting sued and stuff like that. So there's liability there, right? And so you have to be careful in terms of how they do it or how they work it. A lot of these places, these supplement people, what they do is they sell the supplement that kills people, and then they've made so much money, they just pay the family a few $1 million and move on, and then change the name of the supplement and then start all over again. It's the same stuff, they just change the name of whatever the people are taking there. So there's a lot of lawsuits and stuff in our profession. So normally that's why we do some kind of what? Screening, right? And so if you're a personal trainer, I'd make sure you keep paperwork, make sure you document things, make sure you screen things, and so forth. And so remember, you're a professional. I was working with I was working with the police department at this time, and we were doing skin folds. And the skin folds test, I was doing a back of the arm, I was doing a suprailiac skin fold, and I was doing a thigh skin fold. Okay. And so here, and here. And in the police department, they had to be make a certain body fat, or they had to do some extra work or something like that. So, and policemen are different than firemen; they're a lot different. Okay. And so this lady came in; she wanted to be a police officer. She had to pass the screening test. So I take a skin fold, just like on you. I measure right here, measure here, and then I measure there. Okay, then she goes back to the police department and says that I was touching her all over and I inappropriately was trying to mess with her. And I don't think so. It's like, what are you trying to have a lawsuit on me for like doing a skin fold on somebody? And good thing I had somebody else in the lab. So you guys, if you're doing something with a female or vice versa, make sure you've got somebody there with you. Okay? We had an intern that was in the hospital in Opelika, and they were putting electrodes on a female around the breast and so forth, and he walked in the room or something, and then it was like World War II with that. So, but yeah, just think if with me doing little skin folds on this lady, and then the newspaper gets out and says, Dr. Williford AUM is inappropriately messing with girls in the lab. My wife wouldn't have liked that one bit, and so that would not have been a good situation. So, from a professional standpoint, you need to do what? be careful, right? And make sure that anything you do is professional. It's not risky or anything else, because it'll come back to get you if you're careless with those kinds of things. So screen people, do the park use, do the kind of things that professionals do. And so that's why most doctors will have a nurse in with them when they're doing things with the opposite sex and so forth. So if not, you could get into some problems there. So you've got the screening device. Man, it's huge now compared to what it used to be. It used to be one page. Then we have informed consent. Whenever we do research projects, we have to follow ethical standards, and we have to do an informed consent statement. And so if I'm doing research with you, we'd bring you in the lab and say, here, read this, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and you give us permission to do whatever we're going to do in terms of put you on the treadmill and run you till you can't fall out, or give you some type, take blood from you, or do something in that particular area. So we have to have informed consent. Most of the time, people never read the thing; they just sign the thing and move on. And so, if you go in to have surgery or whatever, they're going to put you to sleep, whatever, you sign informed consent. Are you at risk when they put you to sleep? Yeah. And so, how much risk can you deal with? Okay, and so there are instances of people dying in research projects, and that's one of the reasons people don't trust this vaccine, because there's going to be somebody, someplace, that something happens to them, and then people, I'm not going to do that, or whatever. Okay, and so if you sign the form or whatever in a research study, it allows people to do certain kinds of things to you, right? It may be running. In one study, they had somebody at UAB. They put a tube down their throat. They were measuring something, and she became allergic or had a response to the anesthesia or whatever, and died. Okay. And if I'm doing a research study, and if I want to shut down the university in one day, I could take one of you, put you in the lab, and you had an issue and ended up in the hospital on your deathbed. They would shut down this whole university like that. Okay? And all federal funds would immediately stop. That means money for tuition. That means money for athletics. That means everything that is associated with that money ends at that particular moment until they get the things straightened out there. So you have to be careful when you do things, because even research, make sure you do things ethically, right? Make sure you take care of the people. Make sure that if you're doing somebody on a treadmill or whatever, we have to have a physician present for certain kinds of tests. If I drag somebody in off the street and put them on a treadmill, and they're 70 years old and they haven't had chest pain or a heart attack in the past, and I put them on a treadmill, they down the treadmill, then lawsuit right there, right? Okay. And so with you, I wouldn't be worried, because you're young and healthy and so forth, and so you tend not to be at risk unless you've got some health issues that I don't know about. And then in an informed consent statement, I would ask you in terms of, okay, tell me about this. Are you taking any medications, or if you had any drugs, or whatever, before I would put you on the treadmill and screen you or test you, would do whatever we're going to do. But there have been a bunch of deaths there. Probably the worst was the Nazis in Germany, when they put people in the concentration camps, and if you were in their study, you had a 100% chance of dying. They killed pretty much every one of them. The next worst is probably the Tuskegee study, when they had folks in Tuskegee, Alabama. Syphilis was big at that time. There was no cure for syphilis at that particular time. They had some poor farmers and so forth that worked over there that had syphilis. They didn't do anything to treat them. They just let them go. And they knew they had syphilis, and they knew it was dangerous. At that time, penicillin wasn't invented, and all the penicillin that came about went to the soldiers in the war, and they left the poor people in Tuskegee, Alabama, with syphilis, and just let syphilis eat them up and kill them. Horrible, horrible. Okay. Now, a lot of people in the black community now don't want any type of research or anything done because they go back to the Tuskegee study, where they took that population of folks and just killed them in research studies because they're trying to learn about what? Syphilis, right? And so that's another example of another awful, awful, awful study. And I don't know how many years ago that's been, probably 50 years ago, but still, you know, anytime we talk about research, anytime we talk about studies, we go back to that Tuskegee study, okay? And so, you know, it happened right down the road right here, okay? And so even with animals, you can't do studies with monkeys anymore, okay? It's pretty much gone because they used to mistreat monkeys. I had a professor when I was in school, he was looking at boxing and looking at head injuries, and they had some monkeys, and they had a boxing glove hitting those monkeys in the head, and then they took their brains out and looked at brain damage in monkeys. And so you know, now you can't do that, okay? And so anything you do, you can't mistreat or whatever. There's a lot of rat studies. I got a friend at Auburn that does studies, looked at blood lactate. He used dogs for his animal to study. And pretty much now, that's pretty much out. So you can't go to the pound, get a dog, bring him into your lab, cut him open, and exercise him and look at his blood or whatever, okay? All that has to be controlled in a very controlled environment. Everything has to be taken care of. Everything has to be perfect there. When he first started doing it, he'd have a big old grocery cart. Put those dogs in there, put them to sleep, and wheel them through the Coliseum there. And people look, what's he doing to this poor dog right there? So he eventually people got wind of what he was doing, and I think they sort of shut him down in terms of what his research was there. So you have to be careful, right? Always protect what? Protect yourself, right? Always protect yourself. So that's why we have screening devices and so forth. Okay, informed consent, you can look at that. And there's examples. So if you ever do research, if you're a grad student, hopefully you'll do some kind of research project. You always make sure you have what? Informed consent. And then we have to go through a special department on campus called the IRB. It's called the Institutional Review Board for Human Subject Research. I was the first person to chair that committee on campus, and so our department and psychology are the two biggest departments that did research on this particular campus there. And we needed the IRB because if we were going to get anything published, we had to make sure that everything was approved. And so we started that, and through the years it's evolved and so forth. But it's mainly for human subjects. And then they also have an animal review board, because at Auburn, the vet school there, they do tons and tons of stuff on horses and other animals and different types of research. So they have to have an animal review board, and they have to make sure that everything's appropriate there. I think the only thing we had on this campus was they were doing something with animals, and a student had a needle and he missed the animal, hit them, and injected something, and that was a big mess about that. So it got all cleared up or whatever. So yeah, anytime you do research with humans or animals or whatever, you have to be very, very particular in terms of how it's done and what it's done. That's why we can't, in the U.S., we can't really do any research on steroids. So I can't give you a steroid and see how it affects you in terms of lifting more weight or whatever, because if you're taking a steroid, there's a lot of side effects from steroids and so forth. And so then if you take your car, drive it 100 miles an hour into a bridge or something like that because you're taking a steroid, That's not right. Or if you're a female and then you take steroids, then you start looking like a male. Well, that's just one of the side effects there. So there's issues. Now, if I want to do that study in Mexico, I could probably go do it, and so because they don't have the same standards or rules or regulations, and so that's why a lot of the research is done in some of these countries where they don't have any human rights laws or regulations or whatever. They give people whatever and look to see what happens to them. If I did something with steroids, I'd take a bunch of people and say, hey, I know you're taking steroids, let me ask you about this. Okay? I'm not giving them to them, I'm just measuring them after they've done it on their own. Okay? And so that's the kind of research that you would have to do. That's one reason there's hardly any research on supplements, because there's so many supplements that are dangerous. And so if I give you a supplement and something happens to you, I'm liable. Okay? I'll probably end up in jail or something like that. So that's why there's hardly any research on supplements. That's why we don't know much about supplements. That's why you need to be very careful when you deal with supplements, because a lot of them have all kinds of issues or problems there. Okay, let's look at risk factors in your book. It's really important for you. On page 50, you need to know these. And the first one is age. Men greater or equal to 45, women greater or equal to 55. So, Alec, why do you think age is a risk factor? Where are you there? What about us old dinosaurs? Where are you there? Are we at greater risk? Huh? Yeah, an old dinosaur like me, man, there's a lot of risk. That's why I run every morning in the cold. So yeah, it's as we get older. Why men 45 and women 55? What do you think?
Well, men have a shorter lifespan in general.
Yeah, no, that's not fair. You know, huh? Why y'all live longer?
Maybe we're smarter.
I agree with that.
You have to be able to take care of the family stuff.
Have to do what?
Be able to take care of the family stuff, so we live a little bit longer.
Family? Okay, good possibilities, but I don't know about the validity. So, but yeah, women, y'all do live longer. Why? Well, you're pretty well protected against heart disease until about 55. Okay, and so, but guess what happens after that?
Don't we have to worry about what, sarcopenia, osteoporosis? more
Yeah,
so?
you do. But after 55, y'all catch up really quick. Okay. It's always amazed me that men do really stupid stuff. But then women, they eventually do the same stupid stuff we do. So why didn't y'all learn from us guys, okay? Huh? Why didn't y'all learn? All these dumb guys doing dumb stuff, then y'all go ahead and do the same stupid stuff. And so, the average lifespan of a woman is about 3 or 4 years greater than a male. Okay, so y'all live about 3 or 4 years longer than we do, right? Okay, so you women need to get a younger guy, right? So y'all live the same length of time, right? So I don't think so, but you know, and why don't men get osteoporosis?
Well, they tend to have greater bone density from the get-go.
Yeah, and we just don't. If we live long as y'all did, we'd get all this other stuff too. So we get osteoporosis, but men have bigger bones; they just don't live as long. So, and so we tend not to have it. I saw something the other day. It's you know, old age is the disease, but what's the alternative? Death. So I take old age. So yeah, it's about, in insurance tables, and everybody else has shown that women tend to live longer than men do in general, especially healthy men and women. I think and most of the time you see somebody that's over 100 years old, that's usually a female. Okay, and, normally there's sort of a thin female that you normally see. So, but then men start having heart attacks at what? As early as what? 45, right? Even younger than that. Okay, and so 45 to 55. So, anybody have age as a risk factor? Man, I'm the only one that has that risk factor. I'm special, right? Huh? So hopefully you'll have that risk factor one day. One day. What about family history? That's a big one. And so, we inherit things genetically from our parents. We inherit good stuff, we inherit bad stuff too. And so if we look at family history, we look at myocardial infarction, coronary revascularization, or sudden death before 55 in a father or other first degree relative, or 65 years in a mother or other first degree relative. Okay. So that's 55 and 65. So heart attack, what's coronary vascularization? Revascularization. What is that? Arnold, what's that? Huh? You don't know? What if somebody said they had open heart surgery? And then stent put in, or whatever. That is revascularization, right? And so, somebody goes to the open heart surgery, or bypass surgery, and then they fix their heart, and then they send them what? On their way. My brother had open heart surgery. He had a valve when he was born. He had a valve that didn't work right or whatever. And then in his late 60s, the cardiovascular doctor sent him, or she sent him to UAB to have that fixed. He had anesthesia. And then he had the anesthesia to put him into dementia and Alzheimer's. So he did die from the heart. He died from something else related to the anesthesia that set off something else. And so it's pretty sad. He died a couple of years ago. But so we took him to UAB. He had open heart surgery. They did 150 open heart surgeries that day. 150. That's a pretty good number, right?
Are those surgeries just that quick, or they have that many?
They have that many people.
Wow.
If you had a heart issue right now and tried to go get an appointment with a doctor, they'll say, okay, let me see, we got something 2-3 months from now. Okay. And so there's that many people. There's about 4 million in Alabama. We've got about 1.5 million high blood pressure and heart disease risk factors. 1.5 million in this state. Okay? Huge problem. And it's not cheap either. Okay? And so tons and tons and tons of people in this particular state. Okay, the next one is cigarette smoking. Current smoker or those who quit within the previous 6 months or exposure to environmental tobacco smoke. Okay, so 6 months. Can you get rid of all the bad smoking stuff in 6 months?
No.
I don't think so. I'm not sure how they came up with 6 months. And so there must be some studies that show that, okay, after you kick the habit for 6 months, Okay, but our secretary, she died last year of lung cancer, and she was a huge smoker. Miss Eugenia, we really miss her. And so she smoked and smoked and smoked, and we'd fuss and fuss and fuss. And she smoked, and then we finally got her in her exercise program, and she quit smoking and so forth. And that was about 10 years ago. We had to walk in the gym over there. You know, we were always after her. And so, and finally, one day she started having this big lump on her side of her neck and so forth. And it was lung cancer that spread to the rest of her body. And so they gave her about a few months to live, but she lived about 4 or 5 years after she had the lung cancer. So she did really good considering. So but yeah, we miss her. So any of y'all ever meet Miss Eugenia? She was upstairs in our office up there. So it's pretty. It was sad there. Okay. And exposure to environmental tobacco smoke. And so what does that mean?
Secondhand, living with someone.
Yeah, secondhand smoke. And so you're getting that stuff and so forth. So what about vaping? It hadn't made the book yet, but it will. So anytime you take fluid and bubbles and put in your lungs, it's not good. So that'll destroy your lungs. And so you know, you wouldn't want to, if you cooking food and steam it, you wouldn't want to just start breathing that steam all day long. It's like, golly, what are you doing, man? You're just destroying your lungs. And so, and with your lungs, you can destroy the alveoli. They don't heal. They don't regenerate. When they're dead, when those little cells that try to get stuff up and out and so forth, whenever those cells get damaged, they're damaged. Okay. There've only been a few heart-lung transplants in the whole state where they transplant your lungs, and so get in line for that. You don't have to wait a while. But if you destroy the lungs, and the coal miners and stuff, and pulmonary rehab, that have lung damage and so forth. I think I told you the coal miners I work with, years and years and years later after being in the coal mine, whenever we do give them some moist stuff to breathe, and we pat them on the back, and then they spit that flame and stuff up, it was solid black 4 or 5 years after they worked in the coal mine. And so take care of your lungs. You don't get a second chance with them. The heart, they can sort of put some patches on it, but the lungs, not good. That's why this virus stuff, the virus in these people goes to the lungs and starts destroying their lungs, and then they have to put them on a ventilator because they're not getting enough oxygen. And finally, a lot of them die because of the lung damage there. There's some stuff now looking at vitamin D to help lung function and so forth. I don't know a lot about it, but there's some things, and that's why one reason that young, healthy people have good, healthier lungs. And so that's why you may be able to stand it when somebody's a little bit older or weaker and their lungs aren't quite as good. They tend to get into trouble there. That's why the people that have the additional risk factors, like lung disease or whatever, they tend to die. Okay? And so obesity, lack of exercise, lung disease, and so forth, all those people, when they get COVID, are high risk for death. Okay? High risk. So you want to make sure you do what? You only got one body. It's supposed to last for what? 100 years or more, right? During this day and time. So take care of it. Take care of it. Don't learn anything else. Hopefully you learn that. So cigarette smoking. Physical activity. Not participating in at least 30 minutes of moderate physical activity, 40 to 59% VO2 reserve, that'd be the same as heart rate reserve, on at least 3 days of the week for the last 3 months. 3 days a week for the last 3 months. You think they'll move that to 5 days per week with the guidelines? So, these guidelines, they just don't make them up. It's based on research, so it must show that, okay, If you exercise 30 minutes 3 days a week, you're at less risk than somebody that doesn't exercise at all, right? So it's a start. It's a start. And physical activity is probably the number one risk factor on here related to longevity. It's more powerful than smoking and all these other risk factors. Physical activity is more powerful, but you never hear that mentioned on TV or anything, right? You hear about smoking and hypertension, but you never hear about physical activity. So,
I remember that chart you showed last semester where it was, didn't it say like a person who exercised at like 13 minutes or more or something and smoked had like less risk
Yeah.
than a healthier person who didn't exercise at all? That was kind of wild.
yeah, exactly. In a lot of these foreign countries, there's a lot of smoking going on. What about England? Athletes smoke in England? In some of these countries, a lot of athletes smoke. Okay, and so especially in the European countries. And then China, smoking's huge in China. And so there's so much pollution in China that I think they've outlawed like maybe motorcycles and stuff, and different types of vehicles and stuff like that, because it's you're like in a cloud of just like soot and stuff in some of those big cities and stuff there. So that's why they've got these guidelines now. And I think there's some new guidelines with General Motors and so forth. All the cars in the next 30 years are supposed to be electric and that kind of stuff. So, and the global warming, and you know, they talk about global warming, but they never talk anything about lung disease, do they? Okay, and so it's all about the global warming, but really, you know, it's other stuff too. Obesity, body mass index greater than 30 kilograms per meter square, or waist circumference 102 centimeters, that's 40 inches in men, or greater than, 35 inches in women, okay? And so, obesity is a big risk factor. And so, you know, if the person doesn't know their body mass index, you can do their height and weight and calculate their BMI. BMI is not always accurate, right? Because big muscle guys have high BMIs, even though they have low body fat, or girls. But we can look at waist circumference, greater than 40 inches or greater than 35 inches. I think the Air Force uses waist circumference, don't they? And so, what do they use as their standard? You remember? 39 inches for men.
35
Okay. And so yeah, they use that there. It's not 100% accurate. You can sort of have a big waist and still be lean and muscular, but it's a guideline that some people use. Hypertension. Okay. Systolic blood pressure greater than 140 and diastolic greater than 90, confirmed by measurements on at least 2 separate occasions or on a antihypertensive medication. So, you know, some people have what's called what? White coat syndrome. What is that?
You get nervous when the doctor's checking.
Yeah, you go to the doctor's office and your blood pressure, you may find something, weird disease I got or something. Then the blood pressure's what? High, they're stressed. Anytime you're stressed, your blood pressure goes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to make sure they confirm it by doing what? Multiple measurements, right? And so, you know, if I took my bath, I measured once and I measure again, I should get about the same number, right? And so, or if it's a high number, the doctor may say, oh, come back in tomorrow, we'll do it again. In some of these places, if they use the wrong size cuff, it gives you a different, inaccurate number there. And so, you know, if you got a big old giant weightlifting arm and they put that little old cuff on you, it's going to say, hey, hypertension, okay? And so that's why they should use the right size cuff and so forth to do that. And they should use I guess one day they won't do any stethoscope blood pressures eventually, but the electronic stuff is not near as accurate as where you listen for the blood pressures. Okay, and so you need to practice. You need to be familiar with how to do blood pressures, and You make sure you get the stethoscope put on the radial artery, and make sure that everything is done well. It should be on the right side of the body. The arm should be at shoulder height and so forth. And you should be able to listen and hear that first little sound, boom, 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 boom. First sound is what? Tends to be what? Systolic. That's where the pressure in the heart and artery is strong enough to get the blood underneath what? The cuff, right? And then all of a sudden it goes boom, 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 boom. Then you'll hear it again, and then the heart's not strong enough to do what? Get the blood underneath the cuff, and then you lose track of the sound of the blood pressure, right? And there's other sounds that physicians will look for also. There's 5 different sounds they look for, but the main ones that we look for are the first sound and the last sound, okay? And they call them cortical sounds. And so listen for the first sound and the last sound, and that gives you an indication of the systolic pressure when the heart pumps, and the diastolic pressure when the heart relaxes and recovers. Okay, and so blood pressure is easy. We did some screening in a high school in Birmingham one time, and we had about 100 kids in a cafeteria, and it was loud. And so you got to be able to have a good ear to hear the blood pressures. And don't feel bad. Okay, I can't hear anything. Well, it takes a little practice, right? And then as you practice, if you're taking a blood pressure, somebody does this, it's a big sound on the stethoscope. But just practice a little bit. Just get you a little stethoscope, or you go in our lab and practice, and just practice taking some blood pressures where you can hear the pressures and feel confident with your numbers. Now, with exercise, it's harder because we put people on treadmills, and we're out here, and okay, come here. And so here I'm trying to take her blood pressure, and she's running on a treadmill, and her arm's here. I've got to take her arm like this, and while she's running, and I've got to put the stethoscope here, and then I've got to listen to it while she's running on the treadmill. Okay? And so there's all kinds of what? Pounding and bouncing and everything else. That's why it's a lot easier if you test somebody on a cycle. Because they're doing what? They're sitting there. Okay. Easy. Give me your arm. Okay. Keep pedaling and so forth. So if you only had one device and you had an exercise science clinic, you'd want a cycle ergometer, because you can measure VO2, you can measure everything on a bike that you can on a treadmill. Okay? And it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot easier to deal with. And so Americans are more familiar with treadmill stuff, so a lot of stuff is what? Treadmill. Treadmills are expensive, and they stay torn up all the time. And so, especially and for the stuff we do, we have to have treadmill that'll go fast enough in order to max the person out. And so if the person is running a 5-minute mile, the treadmill may not go fast enough. Okay, so that's why we have to do what? Elevate it. And then if you got somebody that's pounding, boom, 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 over time, what does that do? It tears up the treadmill. Okay? And so they're expensive to deal with. So people say, should I buy some home exercise equipment? I say, if you're going to use it, but just go to the gym and tear up their stuff. Okay? And let them pay for it. It's a lot cheaper. So that's why I go to the gym, and my daughter's got a treadmill and all that stuff, but I usually go outside to do all my exercise. Or if I go to a gym, then I use their stuff. Okay? And so it's a lot easier for me to use their stuff than to have my own stuff. Okay, so hypertension, dyslipidemia. And so what's dyslipidemia? What are lipids? Lipids are fats, right? And so we can take some blood from you. It's easy to do. Just take a little needle, put it in your artery. Okay? Take a blood sample. And take the blood spin the blood in a centrifuge. So we take it, put it in a test tube, and we spin it. Okay, in terms of the fats in the blood, we get HDL. HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. And, you know, chalk used to work really good. HDL, right here. That goes to the bottom. Then we get LDL, low density lipoproteins. That's up here. And then we get VLDL, and then very low density lipoproteins. So those are the three main categories for cholesterol. Now we can go more levels or whatever. And then we have to also have triglycerides and so on, which is another fat. Okay. So we've done studies with blood and exercise looking at cholesterol in the past. Now, HDL is considered the good cholesterol. So H stands for high or healthy or whatever. So the good stuff. So when we do your blood chemistry, we look at HDL, LDL, VLDL, look at triglycerides to see how much fat is in your blood. And cholesterol is good because if you didn't have cholesterol, you wouldn't have any cells in the body. So cholesterol makes up the cell wall, and it has a purpose. So here's an artery. Arteries carry blood with oxygen. Okay, within the artery, you got little cholesterols, molecules. Okay? This is fat. Okay, so if you did cook a hamburger on the stove or in the frying pan, and you get all that white Crisco looking stuff, it's like cholesterol and fat. Okay? And so French fries, stuff like that. So that's fat and cholesterol. So these are LDLs. And then here comes the HDLs. They look like little Pac-Man kind of deals. But they look like little Pac-Mans. And they come, and they take their little Pac-Man mouth, and they eat up or take the LDLs to the liver to be dissolved or utilized or whatever. So, if you've got a lot of HDL, the HDL eats up what? LDL, right? It takes to the liver to be metabolized. So, if we look at your cholesterol, we'll look at total cholesterol, which is the total amount of cholesterol that's like HDL, LDL, VLDL, and so forth. So we look at total cholesterol. We also look at triglycerides. If you drink a lot of alcohol, you got a lot of triglycerides. Right? And then we can look at LDL, which is part of the total, and VLDL, and we can look at HDL. So then, what we do is we look at the percentages of each of those that you have. So, let's say these numbers don't add up exactly, but let's say your total cholesterol is 220. Okay, your LDL is say maybe 150, and your HDL might be 50 or whatever, right? Okay, they're not going to add up to 220, but because of other stuff. So here, even though this person's total cholesterol is sort of high, LDL sort of high, exercise affect cholesterol? Well, exercise may not lower your total cholesterol. You may try to do that with diet, or drugs, or vitamins. Take niacin, that tends to increase HDL. Or different methods to try to change your cholesterol. But the higher the HDL is, the lower the risk. So if you had an HDL of 60 or 70, even though your total cholesterol was over 200, you'd still be at low risk. Exercise may not change your total cholesterol, but exercise will make your HDL cholesterol go up. And there's lots of studies that have shown that. Yeah.
So would you want a high level of total cholesterol if you had a high level of HDL? Would that still be healthy?
Well, if you have a really high level of HDL, your total cholesterol is going to be high too.
Or would that be healthy?
We think so. Now, my friend, my running partner, Lewis Thornton, he probably doesn't mind me telling you this. He's got his cholesterol under control now, but his cholesterol was over 300, which is really high. And we work with a doctor, so he was under control. But I've never seen anybody like him before, ever. I don't know, he's like to be a good specimen to study. His HDL was 120. It's like, wow. Are you at risk or not? Because we don't know, because we've never seen anybody with a profile of an HDL 120. Even though your total cholesterol is 300, look at your HDL. And so, but then there's HDL1, HDL2, HDL3, so it gets more complex and more problems there when we start to study. But in general, I didn't eat meat for a whole year one time. It didn't change my cholesterol any. So it varies with different people there. My cholesterol has always been a little, it's in the low 200s, which is not good. But my alternative is to just do a lot of exercise and start taking medication. So I said, I'm not taking medication. So I'm just taking the risk. So if I don't show up one day, they'll say, hey, you made a bad decision. You should have taken some cholesterol medications. Okay? And so you have to play the odds. You have to play the risk there. Okay? So here in the book, HDL greater than 130 is considered to be a risk factor. Okay? HDL less than 40 is a risk factor. Okay? If total serum cholesterol is always available, use 200 milligrams per deciliter. So, now, all labs will not give you the HDL, LDL. They just may give you the total cholesterol. They say, okay, here, I did your blood, your total cholesterol is like 250 or whatever. Okay, if they tell you that, that means what? It's high, right? That means it's high. Now look at the very bottom of this chart. It says, okay, if your HDL is greater than 60 milligrams per deciliter, that's a negative risk factor. So what does that mean? Nash, what does that mean? Negative risk factor means what? Means that's good. Positive risk factor means what? Bad. So guess what? You get to subtract a risk factor. If your HDL is greater than 60. So if you've got 4 risk factors and HDL greater than 60, then you only have what? 3 risk factors, which is cool. Okay. And so it's good to know. And then, if we're doing our screening and we don't know what their cholesterol is, we sort of count that as a risk factor because we don't know what it is. Okay, and so that's what they tell you. But you don't know any of this stuff, well, you know, it got all risk factors, but I wouldn't even worry about that. Okay, so that's dyslipidemia. Any questions about cholesterol? You know, that you try to eat foods that are what? Not real high in fat, cholesterol, try to keep it down, keep it monitored and so forth. It's not easy. If you go to McDonald's, about everything you eat is about what? 30–40% fat, high in cholesterol, all these french fries and stuff. I'm worried about my grandson who's in the chicken finger generation. And so from age 3 to age 12, I think he only ate chicken fingers. And so we used to take students to conferences and they'd order chicken fingers at the restaurant and I'd say, hey, you want a coloring book with that? Joking with them, and so, yeah.
So if you're on medicine that lowers your cholesterol, would it lower the high density, would it lower the high density levels
What's that?
of cholesterol medication?
If you did what now?
Well, if you were to take, like, if you were on a lipid lowering medication, would it lower your high density levels as well?
Yeah.
But
So-
it said, but you just told us that, like, if you have a high density level, you have a lower risk of heart disease. So I would want to do,
Well, it would really lower the LDL. It wouldn't affect HDL that much.
Okay.
But yeah, so, yeah, they'll put you on some type of statin or some type of lipid lowering medication. If you go to the doctor, very few doctors will say you need to start exercising because of your cholesterol. They say, here, take this drug. The problem with that is you take it forever. You're on it for life. Unless you can find a way to get your cholesterol down some other way with diet or something like that. So you're stuck. You're stuck with $100-something a month on cholesterol medication and so forth. And then, you know, there's people just can't afford it. And so generally, we have something called metabolic syndrome. And what metabolic syndrome is they've got all these risk factors. They've got heart disease, they've got high blood pressure, they're diabetic, and so forth. And they're walking around with all these risk factors with metabolic syndrome, and guess what? It's going to kill them. I promise you, it's going to kill them. And so, but we don't. The problem in the health community is we're so nice to everybody. It's like, oh, that's okay. You know, take a little medication. You know, you'll be fine. Okay. The person is 40% body fat. They've got high blood pressure. They've got high cholesterol. They smoke. They got diabetes. They're a walking time bomb. Their lifespan if they're a male, they'll never get Social Security because they won't ever live that long. I promise you. I'm not making this stuff up. Okay? And so I'm telling you the truth. Most people won't tell you the truth. It's like everybody gets a medal, you know. Don't say nothing now. You know, you may hurt their feelings. Hurt their feelings? I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm just telling you, you need to change. If you don't, you're in trouble. You won't ever see your grandkids. You're in trouble. You may get lucky and survive it, but that's very rare. Okay? And so as an exercise professional, you need to know the truth. I'm not sugarcoating it and saying, oh, they're okay. Just get them exercise a little bit. They might be okay. You know, no. They need to change if they're going to get the benefits, right? Okay. And so hopefully y'all will preach that and talk to the people you know and your clients and get them taken care of, right? And help with that. The next one is diabetes, and that's your blood glucose there. Fasting blood glucose or plasma blood glucose greater than 125 milligrams per deciliter. Or plasma glucose that I use an oral glucose tolerance test greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter, or glycolytic hemoglobin, HbA1c. What's HbA1c? know that. What is HbA1c? They advertise it all the time on TV. Take this medication and your HbA1c will be less than 7% or something like that. So what does that mean? Huh?
The amount of fat in your blood.
Well, not fat, sugar. HbA1c. Now we can prick your finger and we can measure your blood glucose. Okay. We really want to get an accurate number. We fast you. You know, you hadn't eaten any sugars or whatever. We fast. We take your little prick your finger to get your blood glucose and see if it's less than 125 or whatever. It'll go up and down during the day. Especially you athletes, you go out and run around and exercise, and then you burn up all your carbohydrates, and your blood sugar goes down, and then you feel weak and dizzy and stuff like that. So that's normal there. And so it'll vary depending upon the carbohydrate intake and how much exercise that you do. Now, HbA1c is a measure of, it evaluates all those little prick fingers for like 3 months. It tells you what your overall for the past several months is in terms of your blood glucose. And you want that to be, normally less than 7% or 6.5% or whatever. And so if that number is greater than 6.5 or 7%, that means that you haven't been taking good care of yourself in terms of your blood glucose or blood sugar. So it's an indication of your blood glucose over a 2 or 3 month period there. It's over time. Now, and then, we look at diabetes, and then somebody is diabetic, and so, normal is about 100, something like that, less than 125 or whatever. So that tends to be normal there. And then they'll do the test. If you go in, they can do a test on you. They can do an oral glucose tolerance test. What that test is you don't eat anything, and then they go in and give you a certain amount of sugar, and then they look to see what happens to your blood glucose level there. So it's a measured amount that you take, so they can monitor what your blood glucose is based upon that measured amount of glucose that you take. So yeah, that's a medical thing they do. It's we don't see that much of that in our lab or whatever, but that's another measure there. So those are all of the what?
Risk factors.
Risk factors, right? And those are important because we make decisions based on risk factors. So we do case studies, and then we look at the case study, we'll look at the person, we look at the risk factors, and then that gives us an overall indication of what the health is, right? So I've got a case study for you. Today I want you to get in groups of 3. Okay, no more than 3. I'm going to let you work on this as a group, a little group work, and see if you can figure out the answers to these. And this will be similar to like an exam you'll have, a case study. We'll go over a few more things to it, but see if you can figure this information out. You'll take a break while I give these papers out.
Y'all want to be in a